are admitted. So, members of the jury, there's a fair amount of information contained in these stipulations, but since they are admitted exhibits, they will go back to you, to the jury for your review. Exhibit 471 reads as follows: the parties in this matter hereby stipulate that items SC11, swab of bloodstain; SC12, a swab of bloodstain; SC16, handgun; SC19, 1 rock; SC23, rocks; SC26, swab of blood on sidewalk; SC33, swab of blood; SC41, swab from black car were recovered from the scene and provided to the Department of Public Safety Crime Lab for testing and analysis. Items 11, 12, 19, 20, 26, 33, 41 subsequently tested positive for evidence of blood. The parties further stipulate that items 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 13, 15, 22, 23, 27, all fired cartridge cases were recovered from the scene and provided to the Department of Public Safety Crime Lab for testing and analysis. Further, items 14, a fired bullet, and 15, a fired bullet, were recovered from Colin Brew by the medical examiner and subsequently provided to the Department of Public Safety Crime Lab for testing and analysis. Finally, items 39, a fired bullet, and 1094-1, a fired bullet, were recovered from Kyle Zentek by medical personnel and subsequently provided to the Department of Public Safety Crime Lab for testing and analysis. Also provided to the DPS Crime Lab for testing and analysis were SC16, the Glock Model 22 Gen 4 40 caliber with an attached light, along with SC37 pistol magazine and 6 unfired cartridges. Terrence Weaver, a criminalist for the DPS Crime Lab, analyzed all of the above items and made the following findings. Items 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 13, 15, 22, 27 fired cartridge casings were identified as having been fired in item SC16, the Glock pistol. Item 39, fired bullet recovered from Kyle Zentek, results were inconclusive, meaning it could not be eliminated or identified as having been fired in item SC16 Glock pistol. Items 14 and 15, bullets recovered from Colin Brew, were identified as having been fired in SC16 Glock pistol. Item 1094-1, fired bullet recovered from Kyle Zentek, was identified as having been fired from SC16 Glock pistol. SC16 Glock pistol was function test fired. No malfunctions were identified. The attached light was operable. Exhibit 472 reads as follows. The parties stipulate that items SC11, swab of bloodstain; SC12, swab of bloodstain; SC16A, swab from handgun; SC16B, swab from handgun; SC18, 5 rocks; SC19, 1 rock; SC23, rocks; SC21, 2 swabs from rocks; SC26, swab of blood sidewalk; SC33, swab of blood; SC41, swab of black car, were recovered from the scene, packaged, sealed, and sent to the DPS Crime Lab for DNA analysis. These items were later compared against known samples for Colin Brew, Nick Peering, Nick Prado, Kyle Zentek, and Stephen Jones. The lab obtained results from each sample as indicated below. SC11, swab of bloodstain, with the result Nick Peering. SC12, swab of bloodstain, with the result Nick Peering. SC16A, swab from handgun, with the result Stephen Jones. SC16B, swab from handgun, with the result Stephen Jones. SC18, 5 rocks, with the result Kyle Zentek. SC19, 1 rock, with the result Kyle Zentek. SC23 rocks, with the result Kyle Zentek. SC21, 2 swabs from rocks, with the result Kyle Zentek. SC26, swab of blood sidewalk, with the result Kyle Zentek. SC33, swab of blood, Kyle Zentek. SC41, swab of black car, with the result Stephen Jones. Your next witness, Mr. Barker.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Casey Rucker.
Yeah. Is he touched about something different?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah. Okay.
Might as well.
Okay.
You solemnly swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, or do you so affirm?
I do.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr.
All right, thank you. Good morning, sir,
Good morning.
and welcome back.
Thank you.
You've introduced yourself before the jury, but just in case we all forgot, what is your role?
Sure. My name is Casey Rucker. I'm a detective with the City of Flagstaff Police Department.
Okay. And how long have you been a detective?
I've been a detective for just over 11 years now.
All right. And in this case, as we talked about earlier, you had the role of processing the scene. Is that correct?
I did?
All right. Can you describe to the jury what that means in general terms?
Crime scene processing, I think, speaks to the steps that are taken by us to evaluate, record, or document a specific location where it's believed that a crime may have occurred. That location is referred to as the scene. It also identifies or speaks to the collection of items that we've identified to have evidentiary value or potential evidentiary value. So kind of all of those steps put together is just summed up in scene processing.
Okay. And in this case, if you can recall, what time approximately did you arrive at the scene?
About 4:45 in the morning.
All right. At that point, was it still dark outside?
It was.
And what was the state of the scene when you arrived? Describe that.
Well, there were uniformed officers present. The scene had been identified. What I mean by that is yellow police tape had been strung across the roadway of Franklin and around the perimeter of the Mountain View dorm parking lot, identifying that area as the scene.
Okay. And were there, for lack of a better word, were there different levels or sections that were taped off?
There were.
And describe the reason for that.
So there was yellow police tape that strung across Franklin at a couple different, but I guess in short, to sum up the access points into the area is where yellow police tape was hung. Inside the parking lot at Mountain View dorm, in the parking lot, there was to the west, as we learned from our scene walkthrough, the officers had strung tape that ran north and south across the parking lot. And then later, when additional information was learned that there was a vehicle in that parking lot that associated with that scene, there was more yellow tape hung further west of that, running north and south, to make sure that that vehicle was now included into that location.
All right. So if I understand correctly, there was the scene proper where the body was discovered. Is that right?
Right.
And then it was expanded at some point to include the car as well?
Correct.
All right. And so this tape, is that part of securing the scene?
It is. It identifies the scene, but it's also staffed, or the access points to it are staffed with uniformed patrol officers, helping to maintain the integrity of the location and restricting access to allowing law enforcement personnel.
All right. So when you got there, what was the first action of business?
I arrived with Detective Slayton, so these scenes are processed with a team of investigators. And when I arrived, Detective Slayton and I conducted what we call a scene walkthrough, which is really kind of step one, if you will. We met with Officers Herrera and Officer Cota, who walked us through the scene, letting us know what they had observed, items within that location that they had found to have evidentiary value, how they marked them.
Okay. Now, what you indicated earlier, when you arrived, it was still dark outside. Describe the lighting situation, if you could, in that, when I say scene, I'm talking about the scene in the parking lot itself.
The parking lot itself was lit with overhead parking lot lights.
Okay, were you able to see without use of a flashlight?
Well, sort of, yes. I was able to see and navigate the environment, walk through. I could see in front of me. I was conversing during our walkthrough with Officer Coda and with Detective Slayton. I could see them, but we used a flashlight as we were marking items of evidence within that specific location.
Okay, and when you say marking items of evidence, you're talking about things like shell casings, for instance?
Yes.
Okay, and that would help you identify smaller pieces of evidence?
Right.
But as far as identifying people, did you have any trouble identifying people who are part of your team who are helping you?
I could see them, right, yes.
Okay. And along that, there's and we've seen photos, and we'll get to some of these photos later, there's a concrete walkway that separates the parking lot from Mountain View Dorm. Is that illuminated as well?
There were lights that were on the side of the west side of that building itself, if that's what you're talking about, and those were functioning.
Okay. So during this process, as you're identifying items of evidence, are you also photographing the items for documentation?
Yes.
All right. And did you take the photos, or did somebody else?
Detective Rodriguez took the initial scene photos, documenting the landscape and the environment of what that world looked like prior to us manipulating any items or furthering our scene processing. I took photos during the evidence collection, marking and making note of what items had been identified and how they were being numbered and what they were being collected as.
Okay. Now, when you're identifying items of evidence, do you know exactly what's going to be relevant for later investigation?
While I'll concede some items are rather obvious, others are not. So usually we begin with the position that it should be collected, unless there's some circumstances that can be articulated on the scene that would rule that item out.
Okay. And is there a certain order that you identify items? For instance, are you focusing on a geographic area, or are you identifying all the shell casings at once? What do you do?
No, so I think you're spot on when you're saying geographical area. We'll start with a specific region, which in this case was the southeast corner of that parking lot, or that area around where the victim was at rest. And then the scene is processed and items are located, and it moves out from there.
All right. And how far out did you go from, let's talk about the location of the body, how far out did you go from there, identifying items?
Well, that entire area was searched, the parking lot area. And then we were out onto Franklin, and additional items were found on Franklin, or in front of the address of 262 Franklin. The search went into the courtyard. I mean, the search of the area was rather intensive, but with respect to items collected, it's Franklin in front of 262, and then it kind of follows west and south into the parking lot.
Okay. And did that include a search of the car as well?
Later that afternoon, it did, yes.
And when I say car, I'm talking about the red Mustang identified as the defendant's car?
Correct.
Okay. Judge, if I can approach the witness?
Sure.
All right, this is going to take a little bit of time, so bear with me. First, let me hand you what's been marked as exhibits 164 and 165. Do you recognize those?
I do.
And do those depict areas in the parking lot in the dark as you arrived?
They do, right. These are part of the initial scene photographs, correct?
All right. Let me show you also what's been marked as exhibits 274 and 276. What's identified in those exhibits?
These are photographs from inside the car, the red Mustang that was in the parking lot, that were taken later that afternoon when that vehicle was processed.
All right. And then I handed you a stack of exhibits, and I'm going to sit back here and read them off so that we have them in the record. I handed you 182, 185, 187, 188, 190. I also handed you what's already been admitted as 192 and 193. 195, 196, 198, 201, 203, 207, what's been admitted as 209, also 210, 211, 215, 223, 226, 229, 231, what's been admitted already is 233, 235 through 237, 239, 240, 241, 243, 249, 251, 255, 256, and then 371 through 380. Can you just flip through those for me, or have you already, Detective?
No, I was looking through them. These are,
Okay.
sorry.
Just take a minute and then let me know if you recognize what's depicted in all those exhibits.
These are the daytime photographs that I took.
All right. And all of these accurately depict what you saw that evening and that later that day?
Yes.
All right. Move to admit all the photos that I indicated.
Can you tell me what you...
I can go through them again.
Just before you went to 274 and 276, there were some exhibits prior to that. Do you remember what those were?
164 and 165, I think is the ones that you were talking about.
All right. Mr. McGowan?
No objection.
All right, so just follow along, make sure I get this
All
right.
right. I'll check them off.
Exhibits 164, 165, 274, 276, 182, 185, 187, 188, 190, 195, 196, 198, 201, 203, 207, 210, 211, 215, 223, 226, 229, 231, 235, 236, 237, 239, 240, 241, 243, 249, 251, 255, 256, 371 through and including 380 are admitted. Did I miss any?
No, that's perfect. Thank you. All right, so Detective, we're going to look at some of these in a minute. But let me ask you, you talked earlier, or when you came and testified earlier during this trial, that you did a Leica scan or a scan of that area. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
And we've seen throughout the trial what's called a true view Leica scan, and that's the one that you have separate scan locations and you can look a 360-degree view. Is that correct?
It is?
All right. Now, on that true view scan, were you able to import these same images and link them up to where the location where these items were discovered?
That's exactly what I did. I just incorporated a hot link into the scan view, and then when you click on it, it just brings up these images here.
Okay, and that was done.
Relative to each item number.
I'm sorry to cut you off. And that was done in preparation for your testimony today.
Yes.
Okay. At this time, Judge, I'd like to move to admit 317, which is the Leica scan with the addition of the hot links, which incorporates all the images that were just admitted.
No objection.
317 is admitted.
Thank you. I'm going to move back here, Detective, and have you walk through some of these images, okay? First, I'm going to start with 164 that's been admitted. Describe what we're looking at here.
This is one of the initial scene photographs as taken prior to the processing of the scene. To the right, you see the back of the red Ford Mustang that belonged to Mr. Jones.
All right. Now, does this photograph accurately depict the lighting that you could see? Well, let me put it a different way. Does this photo, is it lighter or darker, or exactly how you recall it being when you arrived?
The still photographs are inherently darker than what I remember that landscape being that night. So sort of, because I think the image does a decent job representing the overhead lighting and how you see that kind of amber hue on the ground. But you can also see the added benefit of the white light that is, that Detective Rodriguez is obviously using there in the center of the screen.
Okay. In other words, the naked eye could see things that aren't truly depicted in a photograph.
Correct.
Okay. Let me go to 165 now. Tell me what we're looking at here.
You're looking at the driver's side of that red Ford Mustang as we found it that night.
All right. I'm going to switch over to 317, which is the Leica scan, including the hot links that you described. All right, showing 317. Now, when we say hot links, what are we talking about, Detective?
So those little red circles with a lighter colored asterisk in the middle of it, and then linking to it is the SC number, and then a number. That's noting, SC just notes that those items were located from the scene, and then the number is the sequential order in which that item was collected.
Okay. Now, Detective, you may have a laser pointer up there. Tell me if you don't.
I do.
Okay, so as we're describing some of these items, if you could use that. Now, you indicated that there wasn't, you were going in geographic order as far as itemizing the pieces of evidence. So when we say item 43, 42, this isn't where you started?
No, this was towards the end.
All right. If it's okay with you, I'd like to start on Franklin. Let's work our way in, okay?
Sounds fine.
All right, so if I click on 43, it should
It'll
show us.
bring up, right, the close-up photograph that I took of what is, or the item that was collected as item SC number 43.
All right, and just for the record, what are we looking at in 43?
We're looking at a baseball cap.
All right, I'm going to go back out. Now 42.
That was a shirt that had red staining that was believed to be or was consistent with blood.
All right, and as we scan, are there any other links that I should be aware of in the courtyard area?
No, sir, not from that scan.
Okay. Let's move down the street a little bit. Now I'm on scan 7, and I believe there's some items here. So let's first go to item 41, and it just indicate for the record where that is located.
So across the street, which would be to the south of the address of 262 Franklin, where we were just looking, and a little to the west, we're right next to the driveway accessing the Mountain View parking lot. There's this black-colored passenger car parked on the south side of the street. On the driver's side rear quarter panel, or on the front, the pillar, there was a, we could see where the dust on the outside of the paint had been manipulated, and there was a red stain that was there that we thought was blood. And so we swabbed that. And then I later learned that that was in fact blood, and that blood had belonged to, the DNA of that was Mr. Jones, Stephen Jones.
All right, and it looks like you indicated that here as DNA Stephen Jones, number 41, and that was information that was provided to you via the lab, is that correct, the crime lab?
There were lab reports.
Okay, so that's consistent with their report, is that right?
Correct.
All right, so let's click on 41, and what are we looking at?
Well, unfortunately, you can see my hand here better than anything else. But to the right of where the placard numbered 41 is, where I'm circling with my laser pointer, is the breach and the dust that I was talking about. And right about here where I'm pointing is that small drop of blood.
Okay. Let's go to 40. What are we looking at here?
These are, so now we're looking at the ground. If we could go back, do you mind?
Sure.
So we're at the driver's side rear tire on the ground of that same vehicle. Is a pair of, now you can click on it, I'm sorry, is a pair of eyeglasses that I later learned belonged to Mr. Jones.
All right. I'm sorry. So 39 would be the next one down, and this is where exactly?
It's on the concrete curb leading into the Mountain View dorm parking lot on the red fire lane there. This is we took a swab of this stain. We thought it might be blood. It's on the red curb, so I can't tell whether the color of the dried liquid is. But we swabbed and collected that item.
All right. When you swabbed it, did it remove any of it? Did it appear to be consistent with blood?
I can't remember.
Okay. All right, moving in to the Mountain View parking lot area, there's a number of items here on the curb. Now, as you're identifying items, are you just identifying where you found them?
So with respect to the location as we see them here, that is exactly right. That's where they were when we collected them.
All right, so you don't know if things were moved prior to you arriving, or were you briefed on some of that?
So some of that I know here had been in another location, and some of these items we'll talk about here in a moment had been placed here by their officers.
All right. So let's go through some of these. This is item 35 on the curb. And what are we looking at here?
35 is an empty beer bottle.
All right. And again, did you know at the time if there was any significance to that particular bottle?
No.
You're just being conservative, identifying items that may have something to do with what you're investigating.
That's correct.
Okay. 36.
A victim's driver's license and his wallet.
And you didn't know how that, do you know how that was placed there?
Officer Herrera had collected that from the victim's pant pocket.
Okay. 38.
38 is the identification for Mr. Jones.
Okay. My co-counsel just told me that I didn't clear up this. When you say victim, who are you referring to exactly?
I'm sorry. That's Colin Brew.
Thank you. And then 37, I believe.
So this is the magazine for the Glock handgun that had been located on the scene. One of the uniformed officers had removed this from the weapon itself, rendering it empty.
All right, and it's in a plastic bag. Why is that?
The officer put it in a plastic bag.
How many, if you recall, Detective, well, let me ask you this. Did you later open up some of these items and investigate further when you got back to the station?
We did.
All right. How many live rounds were located inside this magazine?
There were 5 unfired rounds in the magazine and 1 loose round that the officer said was removed from the chamber of the handgun.
All right, thank you. All right, scanning over to the right here, and just for the record, indicate what direction we're looking at.
You're looking east.
And this is toward the Mountain View dorm, toward one of the entrances, is that right?
Correct?
All right, so let me zoom in just a tad. Item 31, or I'm sorry, 34.
So this was some towels that we found that had red staining on it that we thought was consistent with blood that we had collected.
Now, were you aware before you got there that there was medical personnel on scene
Right.
and rendering aid to some of the victims?
Correct.
Okay. Is that consistent with the medical treatment?
Most of the items here are in this area.
All right, just so I can separate here, let me zoom in. 30, now here's 31.
A cell phone,
32,
again, more medical equipment.
33,
So this is a red staining thought to be blood, so we swabbed that, and the swab was collected as the item.
okay, and it indicates here this is blood Kyle Zentek. Is that consistent with the information you received about the DNA results?
From later, right, analysis from the lab, correct.
All right. Now, as I scan over to the right, there are a number of small orange cones. Can you describe the significance of those?
So those cones are placed to other spots of red staining thought to be blood that weren't collected, and it's just intended to illustrate, for like this photo here, kind of the pathway that follows.
Okay. So when you're identifying items, we should be looking at the yellow placards. The orange cones don't necessarily relate to an item collected. Is that right?
The yellow cones do not show anything the orange cones do not show anything collected. They're to illustrate.
Okay. Item 30 now on the concrete walkway.
Part of a broken necklace.
All right. And if I think the majority of them are going to be at this scan location, so.
Scan 3 has an item, I think is our next sequential order, sir.
Okay, let me go to scan 3 then. Oops.
So item SC28 was a thumb drive that we found there in the parking lot.
And again, you don't know any significance that this may have in the case, if any?
Right.
Okay. So I notice in this scan view that you can see the crime tape. Is this the outside perimeter?
This is that tape I was referencing before that was placed to include that red Mustang into the scene.
All right, now let's go to scan location 2. And we have quite a few items here. Let me start with 29 out here on the left.
It's a receipt to Walmart that we had collected as found where the hot link shows geographically into the scene.
Again, did you have any idea if this had any significance at all in the case?
No.
Just conservatively identifying everything in the scene?
Yes.
Okay. 25 here on the curb.
It's a package for like gauze or medical that had red staining thought to be blood that was collected.
All right. Now I'm not gonna be able to go in order because of the amount of items here, but let me just start along this curb. This would be item number 3, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And what are we looking at?
Again, we're looking at a cloth with red staining thought to be blood.
Item number 4.
Is a spent shell casing, .40 caliber.
All right, and did you find other spent shell casings consistent with this one?
Yes.
All right. All right, let's go to number 16.
16 is a close-up photograph that I took recording the handgun and the condition of the handgun as it was when we arrived and when we collected it, or prior to us collecting it.
Okay. And are you familiar with this type of gun?
I am.
What is it?
It's a Glock .40 caliber model 22.
Okay. And are you familiar with this attachment here? I'm pointing to the TLR-1 Streamlight.
Streamlight, right? It's a tactical light that affixes to the weapon. I'm familiar. I have 2 of those.
You have the same model?
I have the same model, yes.
Are you aware of how many lumens it has?
I think Streamlight advertises it at 300 lumens.
All right, thank you. Let's go over to number 17. What are we looking at here?
We're looking at a red hat that was found in the landscape south of that closed parking stall.
I'm sorry, to go back to number 16, this was, you also labeled this as DNA Stephen Jones, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. I can't quite see the, oops, too far probably. Okay, number 18.
So those were rocks that had red staining at the time thought to be blood that were collected and then sent to the lab for analysis.
And the result, I believe, is indicated here as?
Kyle Zentek, yes, sir.
Thank you. Now, number 19.
Same as the previous item, just located next to it.
Number 20.
Same, collected rocks with red staining thought to be blood.
Okay, and this, am I pointing at the right area, this red staining here?
You are, yes.
Were the rocks themselves collected?
Yes.
Okay. Number 24,
There's a pair of eyeglasses found again in the landscape on the corner there that I later learned belonged to Kyle Zentek.
scanning to the left, let's start up here, number 21.
Again, it's a photograph of rocks with blood.
Number 22,
Is a fired or expended shell casing.
'23,
Is the same as the previous item, also located in the rock landscaping to the east of the closed parking stall.
number 5,
An expended or fired shell casing found in the parking lot.
number 6,
Same caliber, expended shell casing.
number 7,
Is a silver, like pendant, maybe from a necklace that was found.
okay, and if we heard testimony from Nick Prado that this was part of that same chain we saw on the concrete walkway, you wouldn't have anything to dispute that?
No.
Number 8,
Part of a chain necklace or the rope of a necklace.
all right, just make sure I'm getting all of these. Number 27,
So this photo doesn't have the placard, the numbered yellowed placard here next to the item. 27 depicts a, can you zoom in on the photo? There's a,
I can.
and then move up and to the right. Or, oh, right, sorry, stop there. Right here, where I'm pointing my laser, is a expended or fired .40 caliber shell casing. So it's just up and right from number where the placard is placed.
All right, thank you. So that's 27. Number, let's go a little bit in order. Number 44,
So 44 is the, like a case that held a blanket that one of the patrol officers had placed over top of the victim as he was at rest.
number 45,
Is the blanket itself.
number 12,
12, like the other items we spoke about, is red staining on the asphalt that was thought to be blood, and the item number itself was swabs taken of that.
okay, and we heard, we had a stipulation read earlier. Are these labeled as SC with the item number?
Yes,
Okay, and that refers to the scene?
yes.
All right, thank you. Moving, scanning to the left here, number 13,
Is a expended or fired shell casing.
number 14,
Is a grade colored hat with red staining.
number 9,
The cigarette.
number 10,
Was like an ace type bandage that had red staining thought to be blood.
number 2,
Again, an expended or fired shell casing.
Detective, if I'm missing anything, let me know. Number 1,
Same, another fired or expended shell casing.
Now, I see some police tape here in the lower right corner. What was that there?
Officers Cota and Herrera, and when the uniformed officers are on scene, and like we were talking a moment ago, during the walkthrough, when they were identifying items that they thought had evidentiary value, that they were marking to try to maintain the integrity, the location of that item, that's what they were marking them with, was yellow police tape.
Number 11.
Was a swab collected of the red bloodstain.
What is this chalk outline here?
That was me circling the location to try to better document with photography, maybe another illustrative point to what you were referencing a moment ago with some of the limitations of photography, but that dark red color against a black asphalt, at the time I just didn't feel was photographing, or that I was able to record it as I was able to see it. So I was outlining these areas with yellow chalk to try to help illustrate the location of where some of these stains were at.
All right, thank you. Let me back up, make sure we don't miss anything. Any other items that oops, failed to click on? That you're aware of, Detective? I know we didn't go in numerical order. No.
No, not that I.
All right. Now, Detective, were you also asked to, at a later point, walk the scene from the front door of 262 East Franklin over to where the defendant's car was located, the red Mustang, and then back over to the scene proper where the body was discovered?
I did.
Okay, and did you document that with video?
I did.
And how was that accomplished?
I think maybe procured is the best way to say it, a body camera video from an officer within our patrol division. And I went to that location and walked from 262 Franklin, the route you just mentioned, videotaping my steps.
Okay. Judge, at this time I'd like to move to admit 381, which is the video described by the witness.
No objection.
381 is admitted.
And before I get to that, I'm sorry I got a little ahead of myself, Detective. We didn't talk about the photos from inside the defendant's car. So let me go to those. That was 274 and 276. So first, 274. Describe what we're looking at here.
This is an entry photo or taken of the inside of the car, driver's side door looking in prior to the search of that car later that afternoon.
So this was the state it was found in other words?
Correct.
With the seat leaning forward, the glove box open?
Hadn't been manipulated, no, sir.
All right, let me show what's been admitted as 276 now. And what are we looking at here?
Here you're looking at like a nylon zippered case that was located on the front passenger seat of that car.
All right, now at this time, I'm going to play what's been admitted as 381, which is the video that you described. Before I play it, Detective, this is 381. Just describe where you're standing at this point.
I'm standing on the front porch or the front doorstep of 262 East Franklin, looking south at Mountain View Dorms.
Okay. Which unit is it?
1,
All right, thank you.
far west.
And so the date and time at the top right-hand corner, is that accurate? If you can
Can't
see
Say
it.
March 25th.
Yeah, it appears easier to read on my computer, but that would be an accurate, the accurate date and time.
Yes.
All right. In other words, this wasn't taken the same day that you were investigating the scene.
No.
All right. Playing 381. Let me stop right here for a moment. Was this the stall where the defendant's car was parked when you investigated the scene?
Yes.
All right, it would have been the fifth stall in from the east of that parking lot?
That's correct.
All right. Took me a minute to realize where we were. And I noticed before you had stopped for a short period right at that corner entrance to Mountain View dorm parking lot. Is that signifying where that black car was that we saw earlier?
That's exactly right.
All right, let me finish playing the video. 381. All right, that concludes the video. Detective, were you, I think it's pretty clear that you weren't running this scene. What was your pace as you were filming?
I was walking at a normal gait for myself.
Okay. Detective, I'd asked you prior to your testimony if you would bring a measuring tape. Do you have one?
I do. It's in my bag. There's a front zipper on it next to your desk there, on a small pouch on the side. There it is.
Approach witness.
Yes.
And your measuring tape, is that a 100-foot measuring tape?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to ask you to hold that measuring tape, and I'm going to walk as far as I can for the back of the courtroom.
Oh, sorry. Yep, we're good.
I know there's some slack in it. What does that say?
42 feet.
42 feet.
It's right here.
Go ahead and line it up. You measured the distance from the defendant's car, the red Mustang, to where the victim's body was found. What was that distance?
95 feet, I believe, about.
All right. May I have a moment, Judge?
Yes.
All right, Detective, thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. McCowan?
Good morning, Detective.
Good morning.
You did some other measurements that when you were here before, we asked you to do some additional measurements, and you did those, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to go through those. Did you do an analysis of the, actually, if we could throw 316 in?
Sure. 360, not the one with the links.
316. We don't have
Which station? Franklin? Okay. This way, you mean? Okay.
Now, Detective, that station, is that in the middle of Franklin?
Real close to that, right?
And did you do a measurement from the middle of Franklin to the end of the bush line along that sidewalk there?
I'm sorry, going south? With the way we're looking? I just
Right,
wanna
the
make
way
sure
we're looking. Did you do a measurement that direction? It was one of the measurements we asked you to do.
So I have a measurement of the street and its width.
But you didn't do a measurement from the middle of the street to the end of the bush line?
No.
Is that something you can do like during a break?
Yes.
Okay, we'll come back to that. I take it, since you didn't do that one, you probably didn't do the one from,
I went east to west.
right, did you do one from the curb of Franklin on the courtyard side to the end of the bush line?
Not going inward.
Okay.
Perhaps I misunderstood what we were looking for.
Those were a couple requests we made later, may not have been communicated to you, so we'll just ask you to do that at a break. We'll come back
Sure.
to those, okay? Now, if we could go, I think station 5, maybe.
Right here.
Yeah. Further in, facing the scene.
Number 2. Okay. This one?
Yeah. Okay. Now, we also asked you to do a measurement of the slope of that gravel. Did you do that?
We did.
And what did you find?
The slope is about 11 degrees.
Okay. And the slope is 11 degrees. What's the difference in elevation between that sidewalk and the parking lot?
I'm sorry, that's what I'm talking about when I say it's got about an 11-degree downslope over at 11.3 foot distance.
Okay. So in terms of elevation, how much higher is the sidewalk from the parking lot?
A couple of feet.
And the length of that gravel is 11 feet.
Just over.
And then you did a measurement from Stephen's car to the further entrance to the parking lot, right? Can we take that view
Sorry, which one?
from Stephen's car down to the other end of the parking lot?
Oh, I'm sorry. Which one?
You're talking looking west,
Yes.
right?
You would think after all this time I'd have east, west, north,
I'm
south
sorry.
memorized, but I don't. So this view, do you have that measurement?
It was over 200 feet, I believe. If you have my report handy, I have that. I have the exact measurement, but it was over 200 feet, I feel confident with.
That's good enough. So from his car to that exit, over 200 feet.
So where I measured from was this point on the parking stall, which is the northwest corner of that painted white line defining the parking stall. And then to the far west end on the north side of the parking lot, there's another entrance that is similar to the one we've been looking at on the eastern side. And I'm right about midpoint on the, what would be the easterly curb.
And there is a fence that we can see. There's brick columns, and then that's wrought iron fence, right?
Right.
That goes around the perimeter of that parking lot, right?
It does.
So once you come in the entrance, we've been talking about the whole trial, the Mountain View entrance. The only other way out is way down there, right?
You mean only other way out to the north? Because you could exit south and, I just want to make sure I'm understanding
Right.
your
So
question.
you could go through the big mob, or you can run that way over 200 feet, right?
Yeah, so if you were looking to exit west, you'd be at least 200 feet, if I'm following what you're asking.
Right. That's what I'm asking. Okay. Now, if we could go back to scene station 2, please. And actually, for this, if you don't mind, if we could go to 317.
Yeah.
Thanks. Now, I'm not going to go through each one of those photos again with you. Spare you that. But did I get the count right? Were there 10 casings?
Yes,
Okay. And the casings are what holds the bullet, right? What's expelled after the shot?
correct,
So there's 10 casings, which means there were 10 shots from that scene,
correct.
right? Did you, by chance, measure the height of that curb over there?
The curb at the end of the parking stall?
Yeah.
No, but it's measurable.
Okay. I'll ask you to do that at the break, too, please.
Sure.
You already said with that walkthrough that you did with the video, you're just walking at a normal pace. You weren't trying to portray the route that Stephen actually took, right?
Correct.
What was the width of the parking lot? Did you measure that?
As far as north to south width of
Right.
blacktop asphalt, no, but again, measurable.
Okay, we'll add that to the list, thanks. Okay. Now, if we could go, I'm not sure what station this is over by where
You want the same?
it's sort of down the line, sidewalk.
Sure. I think it's number 5.
Yeah,
This one?
yeah, just go down the line of the sidewalk.
Down this way?
Okay. You mentioned those orange cones. So those, each one of those orange cones represented something that you perceived as possible blood,
Correct.
but you didn't collect those.
We collected some of those, not all of those.
But you didn't analyze them.
I'm sorry?
You didn't have them sent to the lab for analysis.
Where the yellow cones are?
The orange cones.
I'm sorry. Orange cones, no.
Okay. So it's fair to say there's a lot of spots of blood on that scene that you did not have analyzed, right?
Everywhere where you see an orange cone.
Right. Was there also blood spots found over in the parking stall, the main scene, if you will, that wasn't analyzed?
We swabbed most of them. I can't think of any off the top of my head that we didn't collect, but the ones that we did, and again, everything's photographed, so we could reference it, but everything we did has a yellowed numbered evidence marker.
And if it's got the yellow number, then you did send it for analysis.
follow the same trail. So there's my thinking there.
Okay. Yeah, wasn't really asking you to explain yourself. I just want to make it clear that there's a lot of blood that wasn't analyzed, right?
Yeah, again, everywhere we see an orange cone, there's no blood collected.
And we've seen a lot of the photos. These are almost all photos you took, right?
Correct.
Okay. But there are a lot more photos you took that we don't see here, right?
Correct.
I want to go over some of those photos.
Sure.
I'm going to show you what's marked as Exhibit 402 through 407.
Yes.
You recognize those photos?
I do.
And those are photos you took of at the scene?
They are.
You had a chance to look at all of them?
Yes.
Okay. Then I'm going to move to admit Exhibit 402 through 407.
Judge, I'm sure they're fine. I didn't get a chance to look at them.
Yeah, let me show you.
Okay. 402 through 407 are admitted.
Permission to publish, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
Have it set up.
Ready? That's mine. You hit this.
So, what are we looking at here?
We're looking at excuse me, we're looking at a tree that's located to the south, where's my pointer, of the parking lot. So we're kind of south and just to the west of that closed parking stall that we've been talking about this morning.
Okay, so we see a curb over there for facing the photo on the right side of the photo, right?
Do you want the laser
No,
pointer?
it's okay. You point to where I'm describing.
Over here to the
Yeah.
view right, correct.
The other side of that curb is where a lot of the other evidence was collected, right?
Yes,
Okay. I mean, you can't see it there, but that's about where the gun was found, right? On that curb area.
just out of view, that's right. Would be to the bottom right of there.
Okay. Let's go to the next photo, please. What are we looking at there?
So we're looking, now I have positioning to try to orient ourselves. My back is to that parking lot, and I'm looking into the tree. And you can see the yellow police tape here in the middle of the image. That's attached to a small branch. And if you follow that branch up to right where I'm pointing here, that branch is broke.
And the next photo, please. And that's a close-up of the broken branch there.
It is.
Okay. And the next photo, please. Just another view of the broken branch.
Trying to document the broken branch, yes, sir.
Next photo, please. Okay. Now this is sort of stepping back. Are you back in the parking lot now when you take that photo?
I can't say that I'm in the parking lot because I would, if I was, I'd expect to see some sidewalk here at the bottom. I don't, but I'm definitely the same view of the parking lot is to my back, looking at the tree to the south. And that depicts maybe not so well shown in the image at the bottom, though, is the branch.
Right, so there's some shadow from the tree, but you can see the branch that has fallen after it was broken, right?
Right.
And it's fair to say that the grounds there are pretty well maintained. You don't see a lot of other debris around, right?
Agreed.
Okay, and we saw that close-up of the break. Fair to say that was a pretty fresh break of that branch.
It looked like it.
Is there another photo? Oh, that's just further back, right? Is that closer to the curb now?
Yeah, and it's, again, with my back to the parking lot, I've kind of sidestepped a little to the right,
Okay.
just trying to orient or place its location.
Is there another one? Oh, and then this gives you a little more orientation of where that tree is compared to where a lot of the other evidence was collected, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And it's the tree that we're talking about with the broken branch is the second one back there, right?
That's right, to the left.
Okay, the one further back.
Yes.
I think that's it, right? Might be a good time to break so we can get those other measurements.
Let me have council approach. All right, folks, we'll go ahead and stand at recess for 15 minutes. Please remember the admonition. All right, folks, see you in 15 minutes. Oh, Burgess.
Look at it here. So what I want is from basically the end of this bush line.
a piece of paper there?
No.
No, that's fine. I thought it was all communicated to you. We'll be okay. Yeah. End of the bush line, along Mountain View, out to the middle of Franklin, on the double yellows. And then
You just want that north to south.
yeah, that distance.
Uh-huh.
And then the same bush line across the street to the curb on Franklin.
Mid-Franklin
Just
to the
a few
double
more feet,
yellows.
yeah.
And then we want to go, you want to take that same line. So you're just looking for 2 points, but you're taking it all the way into the Franklin
Yeah, one
curve.
from the middle of the street and one from the curb.
Okay, so just those two?
Yeah. Actually,
If I can,
instead of the curb, if you could do
where am
from.
I at? Hang on, let me see. Where's the? Oh, I'm sorry. All right, what's the third one you're looking for?
So this one actually, when I say Franklin curb, like from, you know, the walkthrough you did, basically from where you started your
doorway.
walkthrough, but instead of going to the car, just walk along the sidewalk. Folks, please be seated.
Okay, we're back on the record. All parties, council, Mr. Jones, and members of our jury are present. Go ahead, Mr. McCowan.
Thank you. Okay, Detective, were you able to do those measurements that we discussed?
I was.
Thanks for doing that. Let's start with the curb. What was the curb height?
6 inches approximately,
Okay. And then the width of the parking lot?
about 116 feet north to south.
Okay. Now, I'm going to pull up the Leica scan for these other two measurements.
Sure.
Station, we're going to look down Mountain from the street. Yeah. Okay, now, did you get a measurement from the middle of Franklin to the end of the bush line?
About 175 feet.
Okay. Now, if we could go to maybe Station 5, the station that shows the main scene. Two. Okay, so if you could use your pointer there and point to, when we reference the end of the bush line, what we're talking about.
We're talking the southernmost part of this small bush here.
Okay, so you measured from that point on the sidewalk there out to the middle of Franklin,
Correct.
and you got 175 feet.
Right about, yes, sir.
Okay, now, then you did another measurement that went over to the other side of Franklin into the courtyard area, right?
To the curb, right.
So you did from this same spot, this bush line here on the sidewalk, right?
Correct.
And then let's go back to that station we were at. Yeah. And face the courtyard, please. Where did you stop your measurement?
Right along this curb line here is
Okay.
depicted at
Did
the
you do it
sidewalk.
right there where it's sort of the red curb ends and meets the driveway?
It's that area.
That area, okay. And what measurement did you get there?
About 195 feet.
And you weren't able to measure from, say, Unit 1, like you did with the walkway, right?
Correct.
That's just the limitations of what you have available right now. You weren't able to do that.
Well, you're right, because it's going to measure in a straight line.
Yeah, that'd take you right through a building, right?
Correct.
So the best you could do is take it to that point on the curb there, right?
Correct.
Fair to say that if you actually did walk up to Unit 1, it would be several more feet, right?
It would be greater, sure, yes.
Yeah. So it's 195 feet from that curb to the end of the bush line. It would be fair to say over 200 feet from Unit 1 to the end of the bush line, right?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Thanks. Your Honor, may I approach the Exhibit 418?
Yeah, and did we want to do something on 233 too?
We can do that now or later.
Okay, all righty. We'll just remember it, please. So this is 418.
418. Jack, do you recognize that?
I do. Yes.
I'm going to move to admit Exhibit 418 at this time, Your Honor.
No objection.
418 is admitted.
Okay. What is that photo?
This is a photograph of the magazine with all of the unfired ammunition. Well, that's exactly what the photo was. It was just taken at the police station after the scene had been
Right.
processed.
So for novices like me, the magazines thing that goes in the gun that holds the bullets, right?
That's exactly right.
And you took the bullets out of the magazine and laid them out and took a photo of it, right?
That's correct.
Do you have it queued up, or do you want to just publish it the old-fashioned way? May we publish to the jury, Your Honor?
Yes.
You could just hold that up so they can see what it is we're trying to do. And that's a photo you took at the station later?
Later.
Okay. And there's 6 bullets there?
6, yes, sir.
Now, I apologize. I know I said I was done with 316. I want to go back to it again. Let's do probably the view we were at. Thank you. Okay, so Detective, it's about time that I learn the directions here, the compass of this location. So I'm going to use this and your assistance to orient myself and anyone else who hasn't figured it out yet, okay? What direction are we looking right now?
East.
East. Okay. So if we turn and face the courtyard, well, okay, we'll do this. If we just pick a direction.
Where do you want?
Go to the courtyard.
I want to stop.
Okay. What direction is that?
North.
Okay. Now let's keep swinging around.
To the left?
Sure. What direction is that?
West.
And just the next. And what direction is that?
South.
Thank you. I'm probably still going to forget it, but thank you. No further questions.
All right. Redirect.
Just briefly, Detective. First, I neglected to admit Exhibit 230.
33 is admitted.
Thank you. Detective, so you did some measurements during the break. One of the measurements, I believe you indicated, was the height of the curb was 6 inches. Which curb were you referring to?
The curb on the southern part of the parking lot.
Okay. And the curb running east along that concrete walkway, is that substantially the same height,
I think it's pretty standard.
6 inches?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be the 6-inch curb that separates the walkway from that gravel area as well, right?
Yeah, it'd be close.
All right, thank you. We saw some photos of a tree and a branch earlier. Do you know how far off the ground that branch was?
I don't.
Was it taller than you, or the height? I'm not just it made it make you feel bad.
I appreciate that. I think so.
Okay. Just from your memory?
Right.
It wasn't measured, though.
No.
And how far was that tree with that broken branch from, say, Colin's body?
About 30 feet.
You were asked questions about the blood that was collected. As a detective, do you have to make some priorities about what's collected and what's not collected?
There's decisions made, sure.
And how do you make those decisions?
Well, we collect everything that we certainly feel needs to be collected. But at the same time, some items, I mean, we're applying some reasonableness and some experience and some training on what, if you have to swab it, you swab it. Like we talk about in our scenes, there's a story to be told there. But if we don't, and we feel like we talked about with the orange cones here, there was swabs collected from that blood, just didn't feel it was necessary to swab every piece of that.
Okay, and these orange cones indicated any single drop of blood, is that right?
Correct.
This wasn't a long, there wasn't pooling of blood, in other words.
Right, so anywhere we saw red staining we thought to be blood, We marked it for illustrative purposes if we didn't collect it.
All right, so if we went back to 316, and, well, let me do that right now. So on 316, as we look back from Station 5 at these orange cones, do you recall whose blood was over here toward this Mountain View entrance?
Kyle Zentek.
Kyle Zentek. And then if we went over to Station 2, and as we were looking at the blood located in this corner, I'm indicating just the southeast corner of this parking lot, whose blood was indicated here?
Kyle Zentek.
Okay, and then there's a number of cones of blood drops, indicating blood drops between those 2 points, is that right?
Correct?
So what's the story being told there?
That it's the same blood trail? Or from the same source?
All right. Did you make sure to swab bigger areas of blood or where there was pooling?
I don't know that I could say that it was the decision to swab or not swab was made off of the size of the staining as much as like we're talking about its geographical location and its relationship with the staining around it,
Okay,
if that makes sense.
sure. You were asked questions about the fencing that ran along the north side of that parking lot. Remember that?
Yes.
So there's an entrance that we've been referring to frequently during trial, which is the one closest to Mountain View dorm, right?
Yes?
And then there's one on the other side of that parking lot as well, right?
Correct.
And I'm talking about the west.
The
Do I have that
west
right?
end. Right. Still north side of the parking lot, but due west.
Okay. Is there any fencing along the westernmost part of that parking lot?
No.
And what's on the south side of that parking lot?
There's some fencing that circles the outdoor stadium for the NAU campus. But as you follow that kind of concrete driveway, walkway that we've been that continues open, flowing south.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, the only wrought iron fencing that was described runs along the north side of that parking lot
It's on the north side, moving east and west.
with 2 entrances
Correct.
or exits. Okay. May I have a moment, Judge?
Yes.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you, Detective.
And I'll turn to members of our jury and see if they have any questions for this witness. Looks like we do, so I'll see counsel and court reporter to sidebar. All right, Detective, the jury does have some questions for you. The first question is blood collected and/or analyzed primarily for identification purposes?
I'd agree with that.
The next question is it common practice for detectives to arrive on a crime scene several hours after an incident?
That honestly just depends on kind of when and where something happens.
The next question is, are all areas of a crime scene kept secured so that no items can be tampered with?
Correct? Maintain a scene integrity, yes?
Excuse me. The next question is, can we see the crime scene from the far upper corner window in Mountain View dorm on the Leica scan?
I can't publish that today in the courtroom.
The next question is it necessary to move evidence at the crime scene by officers prior to witnesses' documentation of the crime scene, for example, the Glock magazine and identification?
I'm sorry, Judge, could you read the first part of that one more time for me?
Sure. Is it necessary to move evidence at the crime scene by officers prior to witnesses' documentation of the crime scene, for example, the Glock magazine and identification?
So I think the answer to that is sometimes. In this case, I know the officers felt that there was a loaded weapon with a lot of people still around. So it felt it best to unload it. I don't know that I can disagree with that as I sit here today.
The next question is, are you told where evidence was located prior to you documenting the evidence if it was moved?
Yes, so that's part of our scene walkthrough is when we're obtaining what evidence was located where and by whom, and if it's been manipulated, where was it prior to, where is it now?
Can you confirm that the length of the gravel slope is 11.3 feet and the angle of the slope is 11 degrees?
That's really, really close.
The next question is, from where Kyle was found near the gate of Mountain View and where blood was identified as Kyle's from the corner, it could be surmised that the blood trail could be Kyle's. But earlier we heard testimony from Nick Prato saying he ran down the sidewalk with a wound to his neck. Could that blood trail also belong to Nick Prato?
I don't know who sourced the stains that are marked with orange cones.
Follow up, Mr. Barker.
Yeah. Just on that last point, Detective. You indicated earlier that the orange cones represented where blood was found along that sidewalk area, right?
Correct. Excuse me.
And if I scan, this is 316 for the record, if I scan, we see what appears to be a trail of those cones. Is that fair?
Correct.
And then the trail ends here, doesn't it? Where the Mountain View entrance is?
That's also correct.
All right. You didn't locate any other blood going toward the courtyard area that followed this trail?
No.
All right. And this is the location where Kyle's blood was found and swabbed for on the concrete next to the medical equipment?
Yes.
You were asked a question about securing the scene. Were other officers there around the perimeter to make sure no one was going in the scene?
Correct.
And there's such thing as a crime roster or a scene roster, is that right?
Yes.
And what is that?
That's the uniformed officer that's holding that position. Anybody that comes in and out, a law enforcement personnel, he writes down who that officer is, what time they entered, what time they exited.
Okay. And that was done in this case?
Yes.
You were asked a question about if it's common for detectives to arrive hours after an event. Were police there during the entire time they arrived to the time you arrived?
Correct.
Okay. And were other detectives present besides yourself?
Yes,
And other supervisors were there before you as well?
indeed.
Okay. You were asked about the view from Mountain View dorm into the parking lot. As you sit here now, you're unable to do that because it requires some other equipment, is that right?
Correct. It requires that laptop that we had viewed it on prior to today,
Okay.
last time I was here.
And if I could have just a moment, Judge, to look through.
Sure. Yes.
NAU has been marked as 350. What is that?
This is a snapshot I took of the scan station with a bird's eye view looking down onto the scene.
All right, and not quite the view or perspective from the Mountain View dorm windows, but is it positioned in such a way that you can see the distance between the windows and the parking lot and concrete walkway?
Yes.
Do you happen to know the distance between that Mountain View dorm and the walkway?
So the corner of the building to the sidewalk, to the edge of the concrete sidewalk, because that building angles, is about 10 feet.
Okay. And I'm sorry, what exhibit was that again?
350, 350.
Move to admit 350, Judge.
No objection.
350 is admitted.
That's all I have.
Mr. McGowan?
No question, John.
All right. Can this witness be excused?
Yes, thank you.
Detective, thank you for your testimony. You're excused.
If you don't mind.
Your next witness, Mr. Barker.
Judge, at this time, the state rests. Thank
All
you.
right. May I have counsel approach, please? And so we are going to have to break early for lunch. So we will go ahead and stand at recess until 1:30, and then we'll reconvene at that time. Please remember the admonition.
Require proof of a voluntary act, and that's something that the state has to establish. The evidence in this case presented by the state has shown that at the time both Mr. Prado and Mr. Zintek were wounded. This was in that second round, or the second cluster of shots. We've had testimony that Stephen was injured, that there were people who were assaulting him. We had testimony yesterday, somebody admitting that he was in a headlock at the time. Chaotic scene. I would submit to the court that based on the circumstances surrounding the discharge of the bullets at both times when Mr. Prado was injured, so also as to Mr. Zintek, as to count 6 and 7, if we look at the totality of the circumstances, both with regard to the wound paths demonstrating the upward direction in which those bullets were shot, the fact that we have testimony corroborating that Stephen was on the ground, was being attacked, was in a headlock, he had injuries that have been testified to, we have pictures of that corroborate all that. The state has not presented substantial evidence that he voluntarily discharged the weapon at any of the occasions where Mr. Prado and Mr. Zintek were injured. So we ask the court to enter a directed verdict as to counts 4 and 5 and to count 6 and 7. As to count 1, Your Honor, the state has charged Mr. Jones with murder in the first degree under the legal theory that when Mr. Brew was killed, Mr. Jones acted with premeditation. There has simply been no substantial evidence presented by the state to demonstrate any reflection on behalf of Mr. Jones. No evidence presented by the state by which a reasonable juror could determine that the state has established premeditation beyond a reasonable doubt. What we do have is we have evidence, uncontroverted evidence, from the state's own witnesses indicating that Mr. Brew was anywhere from a couple inches to a couple feet from Mr. Jones at the time he was fired upon. The state will make the argument that that's from the muzzle of the gun, but that ignores the fact that Mr. Jones' hands are on the gun at the time. So we have a very short distance between Stephen and Colin at the time the shots were fired. We also have the angle of the wound paths. Medical examiner, I think, was very clear that the wound paths were an accurate reflection of the trajectory of the bullets from the time they left the muzzle of the gun to the time they reached their final resting place in Mr. Brew's body. There's no way to look at those trajectories against the backdrop of Dr. Zarnecki's testimony and not come to the conclusion that Mr. Brew was leaning, lunging, whatever description you want to call it. His body was rotated at a very aggressive angle at the time Stephen fired those shots from a demonstrably short range. We have absolutely no statements that have been attributed to Mr. Jones. In fact, I think this is something that the state has been, pretty particular about in establishing. We have no statements established coming from Mr. Jones prior to the shooting indicated that he was going to shoot, or he had a gun, or otherwise externally manifesting his decision that he was going to fire the gun prior to the shots being fired. There's been no evidence that he was verbalizing anything, making any threats, saying anything to indicate that he had the intent or had already made the decision to discharge his weapon prior to the time that that actually occurred. The reason that all this is important, Judge, especially when we also look at Mr. Peering's testimony, who himself was as close to Mr. Brew when Mr. Brew was shot, both in distance and in time, that essentially the two of them were approaching Stephen at the same time. All of this adds up to just one thing and one thing only, and that's a finding that if anything, you have a incident where Stephen fired his gun as a result of a sudden quarrel. If we look at 13-1101, we look at the definition of premeditation, the statute specifically excludes a situation where the act is a result of a sudden quarrel from premeditation. If we look at the evidence in this case, in a light most favorable to the state, at best, that's what they have. They've not demonstrated premeditation. It's no surprise they barely got past the grand jury with that count. And this is why we have a Rule 20, Judge. This is why the court needs to intervene and put its foot down and say there's simply not been enough evidence for this case, for this charge to go to the jury, and to enter a directed verdict pursuant to that rule.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Mr. Barker?
Thank you, Judge. Is it all right if I sit down?
Sure.
Thank you. I'm just looking through the indictment and looking at the language here. Let me start first with counts 4 and 5 regarding Nicholas Prado. Nick Prado testified yesterday that when he looked at the defendant, he saw the defendant looking back at him, pointed the gun directly at him, and fired. So intent is inferred by his actions. Again, intent, it doesn't have to be established by direct sensory proof. As the court is aware, it can be inferred by all the surrounding circumstances and facts of the case. At a very minimum, what he was doing was acting recklessly when he shot into a crowd of people. But by Nick Prado's testimony, there is substantial evidence that he was targeting Nick Prado when he shot him. As far as Kyle Zentek, Kyle also indicated that he recalled from his memory that the light was shining on him steadily, and he turned to run, and he was fired upon in his back at that point, also showing that there was an intent to fire upon Kyle as well.
Can I interrupt you for just
Sure.
a second? Marie, there's a case on my desk. If you get that case for me, please. Yeah, it's right on my desk. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's all right. As to count 1, first-degree murder, again, intent can be established by all the facts and circumstances. What we have here was that the defendant was punched in the face in the street. By everyone's account, he then disappeared. Shane McConnell, Jacob Mike, did not know where he was, and we know that he went to his car because he didn't have his gun with him prior to that punch. He went to his car, he opened up his door, he got the gun out of that nylon case and out of his glove box, as indicated by the evidence. He chambered around at some point. We know he turned on the light because Zach Volpo, Nick Prado, others have talked about this bright light coming from the direction of the parking lot. He had an opportunity to reflect. The definition for premeditation says specifically proof of actual reflection is not required. Now, as to the defense's second point that this was a sudden quarrel or heat of passion, he had over 240 feet round trip of an opportunity to cool off or to not react to the situation. What he did was he got his gun and he came back to the fray. The jury can make the inference that at the time he went to go get his gun, the 150 feet to his car, that he was reflecting. They can also make an inference that at the point he got his gun out, he was reflecting. Or at the point that he went toward the group 90 feet that he was reflecting. And the jury could also infer that at the point he shined the light on the victims, Colin and Nick Peering, before any movement was made, because that's what the evidence established, people saw the light shining on them before they moved. That he was reflecting at that moment that if they moved toward him or decided to step up to him, that he was going to kill them, shoot them. And that's what he did. And so there is substantial evidence to support the indictment, and we ask the court to deny the motion. Thank you.
We have a lot of folks here, and I think it's kind of incumbent upon me to help the folks who are here kind of understand what it is that we're doing. Because this might seem a little bit different. Under Arizona Rules of Criminal Procedure, we call it a Rule 20 motion. It's a motion that can be brought by defense or by the court on its own initiative to render a judgment of acquittal based upon the review of the evidence presented. The rule cites in part, states in part, on motion of a defendant or on its own initiative, the court shall enter a judgment of acquittal of one or more offenses charged in an indictment or information or complaint after the evidence on either side is closed, if there is no substantial evidence to warrant a conviction. And you heard both Mr. Davidson and Mr. Barker arguing about substantial evidence. I'm referring to State v. West, 226 Arizona 559. I was obviously I've been doing this for a while. I know that this motion is going to be coming. This is again State v. West, and it was a decision issued by our state Supreme Court, and it cites at head notes 3, 4, and 5. On all such motions, meaning the Rule 20 motions, the relevant question is whether, after viewing the evidence in the light most favorable to the prosecution, any rational trier of fact could have found the essential elements of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. And I'll leave out the other cites. The Supreme Court continues, substantial evidence. Rule 20's linchpin phrase is such proof that reasonable persons could accept as adequate and sufficient to support a conclusion of the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Both direct and circumstantial evidence should be considered in determining whether substantial evidence supports a conviction. And I read to the jury the instruction on direct and circumstantial evidence. They go on, the Supreme Court goes on under head notes 6 and 7. On the other hand, when reasonable minds may differ on inferences drawn from the facts, remember, direct or circumstantial, the case must be submitted to the jury, and the trial judge has no discretion to enter a judgment of acquittal. On the basis of the holding in West, I do find from the inferences that reasonable minds could differ, and therefore I have no choice but to deny the motion for acquittal on the charges. However, I will, if requested by the defense, entertain a lesser included offense of disorderly conduct with a weapon to the aggravated assault charges based on the evidence presented so far. Are there any other matters that we need to address before we recess for lunch?
Not from the state, no, thank you.
All right, thank you, folks. We stand adjourned.